Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod. We have Tristan Rogers with us. He's a product-led CEO at Huq Industries. Has been a strategic advisor, minister without portfolio, and a CSO for quite some time. It's not his first company. I was CEO at Concrete for 18 years, which is a lot of time. And Tristan's having a bad day today. So Tristan, welcome to the podcast. What an intro there. Tell us a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, find myself in tech when I'm not really a tech. A long time ago, I set up a web design business. That was in '96 because it sounded interesting. A friend of mine telling me about the internet. This was in '94. He told me about the internet, and I asked him, "What's the internet?" And he said, "It's computers connected together via a telephone line." And my response was, "Why?" He said, "Well, that means you can see what's on my computer and I can see what's on your computer." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, we could share information." Okay, that's cool. And then because he knew me, he said, "We could play games." Okay, that's pretty cool. And that was when I learned about the internet. And then 2 years later, I studied an MA, which I quit. And I realized doing web design was going to be more lucrative. So I set up a web design business. And although I actually ended up going off and doing some other stuff, I ended up buying a couple of car repair garages and restoration garages. I ended up going back into tech. So the 18 years you mentioned at Concrete was actually about 4 different companies all using the same name that I started and stopped. But yeah, now I'm running Huq Industries. I'm not the founder. I've come in as the CEO and in the process of investing in that business to grow it. I sold the last business in 2022, and that was an interesting journey. So I think I see something in Huq, and that's what I'm now going to be doing, helping build up the business to create let's call it a liquidity event, but going on the journey again.
Right. And what are you seeing different in the current AI revolution vs the internet revolution, which you've been part of?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's quite difficult to separate the noise from the reality at the moment. And I'm not sure if that was that any different at the time. I think that, back in the 90s, and I guess
there was tons of noise back then. Tons.
I was going to say there was a ton, and also there's a ton of opportunity. And so, was I qualified to do some of the web projects that I did with a bunch of students? Probably not. But who else were they going to turn to? So we got some outrageous deals done. Maybe that's the same thing going on right now. But of course, the problem is that how equipped are you? I think we probably did quite a good job. I do wonder whether, and also you've got to bear in mind just how the amount of outlets we have now to talk about what we're doing. And I find it quite distracting because everyone's sticking AI into their description about what they do. And who's actually got their own? Everyone's using the same LLMs. So it is a different landscape, even though there are some similarities, there are some big differences too.
Right, for sure. I think, does it really matter if your company is like an AI wrapper, as long as it's value-based, right? An AI wrapper, I just mean that you have a company and it's all wrapped around ChatGPT's API, right? I think it's just about adding value because, I think people need to be honest about like their tech stack for sure, and not be like, oh, I'm some grandiose company, especially if they're going to attract investors, right? And they discover the crappy backend that they have. But I think there are so many people that are not yet in the AI revolution. We're early adopters, right? Like probably 90% of the market isn't there. And they need AI wrappers to experience and AI and understand the value of it and have a specific micro niche use case, right? An AI to evaluate if your plant is going the right way, for example, which would never make money, but get the concept here. And I think as long as you're adding value and as long as you have a nice GTM system, it's not just about product, right? Because you're product led, I know that, but I think sales are very much intertwined in product. You get like feedback, and going to market is as important, if not more right now. It won't be in the future, but more important than having a great product. If you can put it to market, if you can have consumers grow feedback, you can improve the product and eventually have your own proprietary LLM. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I think there's. I'm not going to be alone in thinking that you're. Yes, I agree. You can take an idea and you can use somebody else's LLM to give your customers value. I completely believe that. You're feeding the beast, and I think that, if you're familiar with the Varoufakis book, Techno-feudalism and the Death of Capitalism. Now, he's a self-confessed communist, so take what he says with a pinch of salt, perhaps. But he's talking about the feudal system returning, but now to the cloud, to the internet. So obviously, when it was on land, we had landed gentry. So you were either the landed gentry or you were the peasant that worked on the land, and you couldn't break the cycle. And the Industrial Revolution and capitalism actually did break the cycle, because suddenly, as a peasant, you could leave working the land and paying your feudal rent. You can go work in a factory and break the cycle. And therefore, the American dream is based on starting from nothing and growing something. With these platforms, and to some degree, these platforms existed prior to AI. We're talking about the likes of Meta and Google, et cetera, et cetera. Are they so big now? They own big chunks of the internet, and we can become capitalists. We can become millionaires using their platforms. But are we now at a point where no new platforms will be created? So we're just feeding the beast. That's not necessarily a business conversation, but I think societally it's quite an interesting one to ponder.
Yeah, and certainly my type of conversation. I think Meta and Google are dying companies. Maybe not Meta. The main why is that Zuckerberg's still there. We need the founders in these companies so that they can still thrive. We need these savages, right? Like Larry and Sergey, they're gone. Google is gone for that same reason. What is Google now? It's a bureaucratic, gerontocracy owned type of business. What's bad about these old investors is that they don't want to innovate, and it's purely about money. So the company isn't giving as much value as it was anymore, and they try to keep on in the race of AI. But yeah, I mean, Google has a humongous data moat, but they're so bad at deploying product and innovating and having this founder first mindset that I don't see them going anywhere. And just for that same reason, I think the Microsoft acquisition, quote unquote, because they didn't fully acquire them, but the deal with OpenAI was a bit toxic. Right now, they're not touching OpenAI too much, which is good, but I think it's terrible for the company's culture. I do think that the problem is not necessarily like these big technocratic companies. It's more like the finance behind them, which could be the same problem, right? It's just like old people that just juice the crap out of these companies. They just want the money, and the end consumer doesn't get much value. So yeah, you need to be careful to who you give your data. But for example, OpenAI and ChatGPT, they gave I think limitless memory not so long ago, so they literally like remember everything that I wrote to them, and that is humongous value for me and my business. It knows how I write, it knows every little single details about me, and it writes better than me. It's a better Charles than Charles himself, quite literally, which is scary and dystopian, right? But do you agree with these points? And what are the alternatives, right? If you don't want to feed your data to these companies, you just go open source with Hugging Face, which is not so good.
Sure, but that's the same lure that Google had pre-AI. Oh wow, this Gmail is free. Oh, these maps are free, or this storage
Google
is free.
Docs.
Facebook, same thing. So we've been trading our personal currency for a long time in exchange for goods. So that behavior is set, and it's a bit like breaking the Apple ecosystem. So I can go Android if I wish, but that's hassle. I'm not going to bother. And so those transitions from one to the other. So somebody who's got hooked on all these big tools going to open source, it's just not going to happen. You're a maverick. You're a strange character if you do this. And so I think the pattern is set. And I think that if you extrapolate that out, that is leading to very few people owning most things.
I think another solution is like using various LLMs, and I've seen a product on app not so long ago that is on your command system, so straight up on your computer, and it takes all your data and it centralizes in one place. So ultimately, you're the only one to only have all your data, and you can prompt all these different companies. And yeah, I'm still waiting for the OpenAI phone. I actually very much dislike Apple nowadays. Very low innovation company
Yeah.
again, right? Steve is gone, and we were getting the remnants of that, the skeleton of a company that is juicing out profits and using financial engineering to stay alive. I think the worst example of capitalistic behaviors that have gone too far was Elon acquiring Twitter for democracy, right? And electing the guy that is there right now. And not so long ago, yeah, X.ai bought X, like Twitter, which is fucking confusing, by the way. But long story short, he acquired this platform for democracy, but in the end, he ends up harvesting its data with XAI, right? So
But
I
I would
think
argue that was that if that's what he presented it as, I don't believe it for a second. That was the last piece of kind of green space on the internet that was for sale. He
yeah,
bought it for
it's
44 billion. He now owns a big chunk of the internet.
yeah, but isn't that like told? I'm a good capitalist, you know. Like I'm probably 80 to 90% on the hyper capitalism scale, but that I'm not losing the last 10% digits that I have in there, which are my values and my soul. And when you're trying to sort of manipulate the world, especially lower stratas, which are quite easily manipulable, right? Hey, buying Twitter, but we know what Twitter turned into, right? Like I was only seeing at friggin' Musk and Trump on my feed for some time, and I click like 10 times not interested in these posts, right? And you're doing that, and you're getting what you want, and he elected that guy so that Tesla could benefit from that, and he turned it into an harvesting platform. I mean, like that's the summum of hypocrisy, and I think people are doing that in open lights nowadays, and they use like the anti-woke movement to like suppress people that are against that. So I think we're in a very scary place right now.
So you talked about at the beginning physics. Physics. I think it was before we went live, but sort of the physics working against you. And so a physics term is a phase transition where the properties of a given chemistry change through, say, temperature. So H2O over a very narrow window of temperature change goes from ice to water, and then from water to gas. And those phase transitions therefore can happen very quickly. And so monetary policy and crowd control, certainly some people have modeled how you control certain things based on this sort of phase transition theory. And what it demonstrates is that that's saying too big to fail. So Musk has proven, just as an example, but he's proven time again that he can sort of confound critics. He finds a way through. He invents his way out of it, etc. Which I think is down to his ability to clearly he's a very bright guy, and he can focus on delivering when it matters. But ultimately, everyone has their day. Everyone, and it's often something quite innocuous. When you sent me the questions about favorite entrepreneur, I wrote Juan Tripp, who was the founder of Pan Am.
Interesting. First time I
Absolutely
heard
amazing guy. If you check him out on Wikipedia, for example, the first guy to do this, first guy to do this, first guy to do this, and so on and so on and so on. So basically, transcontinental travel, he created it, and he started from nothing. And he looked too big to fail. He was the face of the jet set. And the thing that tripped him up was so innocuous. It was the precursor to the internet. It was basically these kind of terminals that you plugged into your phone line in the US, where you could look up flights, because there was a lot of domestic flights that had built up over the years. And he was into the big challenges. So how do you go across the Pacific? But what he'd missed was that smaller companies with smaller planes were doing small hops, and that was becoming more popular. And it was American Airlines, I believe, who sponsored the build of these little terminals. And so you could check out what flights you were available to you to do a local hop from one city to the other in the US. And they provided it for free for every airline. And people said, well, that's crazy. Why would they do that? And they said, well, of course, we're doing this because we want it to be useful to the customer. So it might remind you of what Musk said about Twitter. And it's true, they did allow every other airline to be on this terminal. What the consumer and the other airlines didn't quite realize is that if there's 3 pages of results, American Airlines are always at the top. So basically, they were a precursor to how web search operated. They got the vast majority of the flights booked as a result. Ultimately, combination of not investing in small hop flying and not seeing this terminal and how important it became to booking flights, it killed Pan Am. I find it fascinating that these things happen. Kodak, another example, king of film, digital cameras come out, no more Kodak.
Blockbuster. Blockbuster.
Yeah, right.
Etc. Yeah, I think because, yeah, just to come back to Elon, right? And it's painful to me because he was my favorite entrepreneur. I think he was a lot of people's favorite entrepreneur before all the 2020 bullshit started happening. It's just that I think he's been very much mistreated by the government for quite some time, right? Like, and imagine being fucked by the government for like 15 years, right? It's extreme pain, it's extreme rage. And I think Elon, like, he's a fan of Ayn Rand and Fountainhead and all these dystopian books, and he knows about propaganda and all these things. And ironically, he's starting to use these mechanisms, right, that he warned us against. And I think we understand his pain. I think there's some parts of his that is good, and even though the Doge is quite ridiculous name, I think it's good intentions of just slashing what's not working in the gov. But think when you're on top of the world like that, I think you need to be more careful. And I think it's you need to go with win-win mechanisms, right? Like, what do you think of tariffs? Like, it's very much like win-lose philosophy for sure. And I'm not sure if this will pay out even in the long term, because it's a long-term bet and it's very bold, and I appreciate that part of it, but I don't think it's gonna ultimately be a net positive. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not populist politics. I'm supportive of it being not populist, but then in order to what am I positive about? Well, that's slightly more complicated because tariffs are binary. You either put them in place or you don't. Now, obviously, we're seeing him walking back his position on various tariffs. Now, some people are saying that was part of his game plan, go in hard and then pull back, basically get back to where you planned to be in the first place. But I'm not sure if that is really going to move the needle. The underlying issue here, of course, is that if his central narrative is make America great again, what he's really combating is nearly 100 years of inflation, wage inflation and consumer inflation generally. Can you actually make an iPhone in North America cost effectively and sell it cost effectively to the consumers that buy them today? I think that's the underlying issue that America faces, and indeed any developed country faces. So we've had a global economy for a very, very long time. To walk it back in a single term is impossible.
Yeah, with robots, hell yeah. But what happens if there's robots? No fucking jobs.
Right.
Defies logic, right?
Yeah. So I think that being a Brit, I look at what's happening in the US and think, well, it may even be stupid, but it's definitely bold. But at least we can name many significant industrial successes that are modern in North America, whereas I can't name any from the UK at this point. So at least America has invested, even if it has been commercial capital invested. Well, that makes sense because it's a capitalist economy. In Britain we haven't got that, so we can't lay claim to any significant LLMs. In fact, we can't lay claim to much, and I find that pretty depressing. So whilst there is calamity and confusion in North America, at least it's a country that is has achieved an awful lot in the last 60 years, whereas Britain seems to be apologising endlessly.
Right, for sure. I want to ask you one last question before we go, because you mentioned product led, right? And granted, the AI revolution that's happening under us, one of the greatest AI pushes that we're seeing right now is vibe coding. I'm not sure if you've checked it out, but like using tools like Replit or Bolt or Lovable, which is from London, by the way. You absolutely need to check Lovable, top European company. Shout out to the few good European startups that we're seeing right now, if we can consider UK Europe, of course. More on that later.
Geographically.
Yes. It's basically the fact that you can code something as a non-technical person. It's no code, but supercharged. You're prompting an AI, but the output of it is not text. It's a website. It's an app.
Yeah.
So I think that's totally changing the game. And what we're seeing with that is that there's a lot of non-technical folks that now can code apps. Obviously, there's like a bunch of security features that need to be added to that to make it a full app. But we've seen a guy copy Airbnb in like 1 hour, right? Like 80% of Airbnb, let's say, in a functioning prototype, right? So what do you think that will bring to the world? Like, for example, I'm quite good at GTM, and I think that a bunch of people are going to code apps, but they're not going to know how to actually sell it and bring it to market. So that's a huge opportunity for me. What are you seeing out of that?
I agree. I think I'm actually a case in point. So despite ending up in tech, I'm not a tech. So the thing I always saw were opportunities, commercial opportunities. So you speak to somebody in an industry, they tell you their problems, you start thinking about what a solution could be. Now, and if you're in tech, someone else, in my case, needs to build it for you. And so you end up with a software company. Indeed, that's exactly what I'm doing again this time round. So yeah, does it give, the narrative has been not about getting rid of engineers, but just having fewer, more high quality engineers who can achieve many times more what that prior army could have done 5-10 years ago. So I suppose technically I'm in favor of that, because if you can mobilize the idea and you've got a strong go-to-market strategy and you basically know how to establish product market fit and scale it, and you can do it at a lower cost, what's not to like? Again, there's probably a bigger issue about what happens to employment, because that was a golden ticket not long ago, being having studied computer science. But the world continues to change, so you have to embrace change, otherwise you're a Luddite. So I suppose, yeah, I'm in favor of the idea of being able to do more with less.
Thank you for the time today, Tristan. We need to do round 2 because that one was too short. Where can people find out more about you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. So that's still my old school approach. I don't go on X. So yeah, if you want to message me, I'm responsive.
Yeah, try Substack also. Like Substack is great. So that was Tristan Rogers and Charles Cormier for another CEO with